Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to take a look at all the preseason power rankings and where do they stand now. We're going to power rank the power rankings. It's going to be kind of a short one for you. I'm Avast. This is Jayne, and welcome to Contested. Welcome back, everyone. Once again, we are not live for the Frontier Communications Studio in Dallas, Texas, but we will be there soon enough, potentially. It just depends on when we get back to the office. Also, I heard your dog bark there during the intro, Jayne.
My fiance ran away with the puppy into the washroom to try and quiet him down. But yes, Theo says hello to everyone here joining us on Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube watching live. I hope you guys are going to enjoy today's episode. There's Thursday episode of Contested. We're probably going to change the schedule up next week, but we don't have any firm plans for that, so we'll let you know on the Tuesday episode. But yeah, we're not in our studio soon. I'm actually going in for a filming project tomorrow, so I don't know when we're going to be doing Contested there, but at least I'll be back in the studio doing other works while I'm there.
I mean, I think because we can sort of tell the news to you guys in a way is that we're opening up the studio in a very limited fashion, but before we head back there, we've decided we do want to try to continue Contested in like a live format versus the pre-recorded that we were doing earlier as like a test run, but our studio wasn't initially set up for that, and obviously we haven't been able to make any fixes because everyone's been out, so we got to get that set up before we sort of head back in full type of thing, blah 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 blah.
Yeah,
so just a process.
We as part of the kind of transition away from the studio into producing this from our homes or our kitchens, in my regard, we had to go from pre-recorded to live stream, and we don't want to regress and go back to pre-recorded. We want,
because our goal always was to go back to end up on live. You know, it's just we started pre-recorded because that was, you know, when we first start the show, it's just easier. So,
but soon
we'll get there.
Soon with this all opening back up, we get to implement all of our devious, dastardly, wonderful plans. So the flow of content, you can leave the intravenous in, and we will deliver more content. We really need to introduce like a word of the day, because you've had a few zingers from over the last couple of weeks. There's been like 5 times that you've said just ridiculous words, and I just want to like ring a bell and make it the word of the day.
That's like the only value. Well, it's not the only value. I mean, I know, but like that is the power of having a good SAT reading score, is that you know your SAT vocab words. So thank you, College Board, for that, I guess. But now moving on from that is that we also do have a new popping off for a new episode of Contested. This is the popping off presented by Jack in the Box. Oh, well, now we are back and here again with another popping off powered by Jack in the Box. And this week it is Yep Mayhem versus Yep Shock. And our popping off player is going to be Gargoyle. And you might say, why Gargoyle? BQB had a great game. Yaki had a great game during this. Well, on Blizzard World first, here, after Mayhem just finished first holding Shock, they need 1 tick to get the map after Shock's already up 1 in the series to equalize it at 1-1. They're losing players on the point on first. Violet has popped the Baptiste window. Choi gets several frags in a row. But then what does Gargoyle do when they're only up 2 players on the point and they have the spawn disadvantage? Gargoyle gets 1, pops the Flux, kills 1, turns around after getting walled and stuck in the corner, hits the meatiest rock I've ever seen, a meat rock, as you will, and gets rid of the May, and then finds 1 more, and then breaks the shield for the returning Brigida of Moth as well. And Gargoyle wins them first, gets the tick, and also gets that first cap. So great job. That is the popping off presented by Jack in the Box.
I always like those the rocks where it's just like flick and then just slams. Feels so good. And especially with the Florida Mayhem, there were actually quite a few situations. I think one of the most enjoyable kind of like games of chicken was how close Yaki in particular on the Tracer could wait to try and blink those rocks. Right? If he blinks too early, the Sigma's going to be able to react to it. And sometimes you even saw the Sigmas like preemptively 180ing and trying to launch the rock behind them in case Yaki would blink through them early. So, you know, sick rocks, it's definitely a prediction, a skill shot. And that kill onto the May just solidified it, allowed it to finish off the Brigida. I agree. Good play, and Gargoyle did fantastic.
I really liked it. And there was a lot of doubt on Gargoyle earlier in the season, especially coming from, you know, put people from like other analysts like Sideshow and Plat Chat and stuff. Or by the way, speaking of Mayhem, tomorrow there is also a Mayhem like little show match between Sideshow and Yaki, which I'll be a part of, and also Bryn. So if you want to check that out, it'll be tomorrow at like 6 p.m. EST, I believe.
My money's on Sideshow.
Yeah,
lose.
Sideshow has to get 5 kills on Yaki, and they'll give him a 2-week contract, is what they said.
Really?
It's 5 kills. I mean, obviously, but even if they do, it's like the 2 weeks that they're off, right? So he wouldn't
Yeah.
play. So it
I
would
mean,
be really funny.
oh,
But I
that'd
don't
be
think
good
that's gonna
though.
happen. I don't think it's
No?
gonna happen. No, I think Yaki's gonna roll in smoke
I
Sideshow.
mean, Yaki has the power to make this happen. Yaki could just throw.
Yeah, he could sandbag.
I mean,
he could
he
sandbag.
could just go up to Sideshow and be like, hey, let's split that 2-week contract 50-50.
Yeah.
And get a few extra steak dinners.
Sideshow could go to him and like take the fall, like it could be a really easy fall. But all that aside, overall, I'm very impressed with Gargoyle's performance this season, especially when people were doubting him as anything other than just a hog player. Now he's come up, and he did start out pretty rough on Sigma, I will say, but he's gone. That's sort of Mayhem as a whole. Is I think they started out kind of rough, and now they're incredible. Which sort of leads into what our main segment, our main topic today is, Jayne, which is we're going to power rank the power rankings, the preseason power rankings. We're going to take a look at 3 different rankings, including my own, and we're going to compare that to the current standings and how accurate. What can we gain? What can we learn from these changes, and what sort of reflections we can make from there? And I think we're going to put them all up for you guys to see too as we go through each one.
Yeah. So we do have graphics for each one, but which one do you want to start us off with?
We were talking about Sideshow, so let's do the Plat Chat.
All right.
Rankings. Let's do the Plat Chat rankings first. So you see up on your screen should be popping up that there's the Plat Chat rankings versus the actual season rankings. And it's for myself, I gotta make this full screen. I gotta make this full screen because it's kind of zoomed in.
Yeah.
I need to zoom out here so I can actually look at this myself here a bit. But overall, if you take a look at it, I didn't really heavily. I don't know if there was any like huge points of contention before we even get to the current standings. Like when you looked at these rankings, Jayne, was there any huge points of contention for you? Because for myself, I think the biggest was like how they felt about the Titans coming in. But obviously, at this point, it worked out.
This is one of the things about preseason. And sometimes you can be, my favorite Texas sharpshooter, my saying, is where you shoot first and draw the target later. So if you ranked kind of Vancouver Titans to be really low in the power rankings, you can't really say that you're correct, that they actually did turn out to be this bad, because even if you are technically correct, the reasons why you're correct are just completely off the base. So it does surprise me. It did surprise me back then that people were ranking the Vancouver Titans so low very early on. But then another one that kind of stuck out to me quite a bit was both the Washington Justice and the Toronto Defiant.
Oh God, I'm gonna get roasted on that. I regret my Justice ranking. But go on. I'm sorry. I regret my Justice ranking preseason.
But yeah, I think one of the things that Toronto Defiant, especially, I like to follow the Canadian teams. Hello, Theo. How are you doing today? Like the Toronto Defiant were very clearly going to go through a little bit of a rebuilding phase, and they were going over towards more Western players, more specifically Canadian players. They were going towards more of like a marketable approach, and they had some superstars. They definitely had some potential. But it's kind of like, I think that popularity is kind of used too often as a potential future-looking indicator of success. I think that's the nicest way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, you can see that reflected in the Plat Chat rankings. Look at
Absolutely.
Valiant. Look at Valiant. Valiant they're like, this team blows. Like this team is like, there's no way this team's gonna accomplish anything. And now Valiant is sitting in a pretty solid middle of the pack, and they had a tough schedule at times.
Both of us are looking at the Los Angeles Valiant being a little bit more than upper middle.
I would say like top 8.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and then there's like, myself personally, I know that people, it's kind of a bit of a contention with my own content is that I don't really do power rankings that often, almost never, especially not preseason stuff, because there's just so many variables to consider, things that you just simply could not predict. And I think that one of the things that we'll get to talking about a little bit more as like an overarching theme is the fact that there's the difference between taking 6 good players, putting them on a team, and having them succeed, and then really the behind the staff, not just the organizations, not just the staff, but also how do they actually work together qualitatively. And I think that one of the I don't want to say like redeeming factors about these preseason power rankings, but we do have to remember that a lot of people were probably trying to big brain the fuck out of this and be like, oh yes, because of travel, and some teams with bigger teams would have more substitutes. Like there's a lot of people that can pull out that ticket. It's kind of like a get out of jail free card for making bad predictions. It's like, we predicted this to be a LAN. This is what happens if, in the hypothetical world, they were still playing homestands and Dallas Fuel was still traveling to 5 different cities and all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of asterisks sitting all over this conversation. But just to kind of like throw all of that away, I think the ones that surprised me the most with Plat Chat's ranking were how low the Vancouver Titans were, and then how high the Toronto Defiant was.
Yes. What I agree on both pretty heavily. I caught a lot of flack early on, and so did ZP for being, and then you're in this camp too, but you didn't necessarily put it publicly, is about the Toronto Defiant, and it's pretty clear that like the popularity was a huge reason why people thought they were going to be highly ranked, and I think Plat Chat kind of fell to that trap a little bit. They didn't go crazy, right? They didn't put them like in the super tippy top necessarily. Like they didn't go crazy on that like other people did. In fact, I would say none of the analysts in particular put like them incredibly high for the most part. Like it's not the ones that we're looking at. But still, I think it was optimistic for even Plat Chat and for others to put them in like top 12 when you looked at that roster, because it felt like it was pretty, and I felt like I've been proven pretty correct on this too, and yourself included, even though if you didn't make a preseason ranking, is that it was a roster that's too player driven and also had some clear weak points that people wanted to ignore, like most notoriously like Beast Halo. I think
one of the other things that the point against the Toronto Defiant roster could also just be the performance during the World Cup. That team had Surefour and agilities, and it still really quite struggled. So that's not always a good looking sign for things in the future, But
I think we have to ask Jayne. We've had this conversation before, and we're about a midway point, right? And we have some decent amount of data, and now just like Surefour has been essentially binged himself based off this article where he hasn't been playing, and he did an interview, and the heads of the Toronto Defiant, the management team, were just simply like, yeah, Surefour's burnt out because he's disappointed with our results. Essentially, is what they said.
Yeah.
And at that point, I have to ask, like, is the player, because I have an answer to this, is a player-driven culture bad, especially for the Overwatch League? Is it bad? Because that's what Toronto Defiant is, I feel. It's a player. They have player, because also they don't have anything. They have a player coach now, an ex-player coach.
That's the narrative that we've been selling about the Toronto Defiant the entire damn season, right? Is that they are player-driven. I don't think that it's necessarily worse, especially at the, at the lower tiers of play, like semi-professional. I think that player-driven teams have historically shown to be, on average, more powerful than really quite heavily structured teams. And I think that part of that is just because it is a little bit more cutthroat, and people can cut players who aren't performing, and you can have these kind of like super rosters assemble as people try and do like these Royal Road runs through Contenders Trial and Contenders Proper. There is kind of that the more where, if it doesn't work, we just blow it up and try again. There's not much of this kind of emphasis on trying to build a dynasty or trying to build a franchise. So is it better? Is it worse? I don't know, but it's certainly more volatile. And, a lot of the things that we can't tell about why a team is performing behind the scene is these kind of qualitative factors, the things that, you're never going to be able to tell, other than the fact that like your team suddenly starts losing everything. And it's like nothing else has changed. They're still the same players, same staff, same map, same characters, same game. Like what's going wrong? It's something on the inside. And I think that having those like really player-run organizations, it can help, but I also think that it's extremely volatile, and I think that's historically proven.
I'm just saying it's bad. I think it's bad.
Just straight up.
Just straight up. I think it's just straight up bad in a league format. I think the thing is that historically we've seen very big highs for player-run teams, like you've said, but realistically, once you hit the ruts, player-driven teams are extremely difficult for them to get out of it.
Yes.
Especially in a league-style format, and if there actually been travel, I can't even begin to imagine the depths of like nuclear booming that would have occurred within player-driven teams like the Toronto Defiant, because they just simply could not handle that sort of pressure, while also their culture and structure being derived from each other. It's like any ideal system, Like I could go live in a commune, and for the most part, like the idea of a commune is great to me. Like, you show up, everyone helps each other. Like there's not a lot of crime, everyone's taking care of each other, blah, blah, blah. There's not these huge disparities, right? But in practice, it always turns out to be pretty bad because it relies on everyone doing their own thing correctly,
as
which
soon
no
as
one is going to do.
as soon as one person does something wrong, there's nobody around to tell them no, sort of thing. And you can stretch this, I suppose, to apply it to the Vancouver Titans as well. You know, the fact that they were under runner and I am blanking Flowervin.
Flowervin, yeah.
Yeah, they've been kind of like that family unit, and they were a very cohesive, more like a family team rather than like a player driven or like a team. Anyway, but moving over towards the Vancouver Titans, you have like Harsha's being involved, Pagion's being involved, and both of those are kind of like the supportive types of coaches. They're not the ones that really implement quite a regimented structure, something like we would expect to see some from like Arrow or Krusty or something like that. You know, what do you see is you see that team start to implode without that kind of same sort of structure with them to succeed. And I think that especially when you look at the more historical success of the San Francisco Shock and how they are, you know, like they've got some really A-type personalities over it, but they are part of a team, part of a system, structure, franchise, whatever you want to call it. And like their consistent levels of success and how they like very clearly said that, you know, we're preparing for season 2. We're wanting to make this like a long-term thing. And like, it's really, you can't argue with results. Like, look at how well they're doing. They just won the May tournament. So yes.
And that was even after having a dip as well. Even after having a dip, they still like came back. I think the other one that I disagreed with pretty heavily for Plat Chat in particular, and we can take another important lesson from, besides Titans, obviously, because Titans at this point, no one can even draw any conclusions to Titans as a roster because it is not the same thing. It is an entirely different. It's like the Theseus ship like analogy or whatever it's called, like
ship
where
of
like
Theseus.
ship of Theseus, where like if you replace all the boards in a ship, is it even the same ship at this point? And then the answer is no. The answer it is not the same ship.
Anyone who tells you they predicted the Vancouver Titans correctly is either lying or a time traveler. So
yeah, if you predicted that, I have several $100s I wish to spend on lottery tickets, if not more, and I want to talk to you if you predicted this. So if you give me a call, if you predicted that, give me a call. We can get some business done.
We can work this out. We can work this out. Now I want to jump over to your power rankings. We looked at Plat Chats, and Plat Chat has some. They kind of agreed with you on this one point, but I wanted to save it until we talked about your power rankings, because Atlanta Reign is one that the not Paris Eternal, the Plat Chat ranked at number 3 for the league, and you personally ranked them for number 2. Now, this is the weirdest one, because in doing the research about all these preseason power rankings, you know, there are some teams that I just had kind of like this void in my knowledge. It's like, I have no idea. And I think that Atlanta Reign was one of those. So in looking all the way through these power rankings, you know, Atlanta Reign, a very popular team. They have a lot of very good DPS players. But why was it that both Plat Chat and yourself ranked the Atlanta Reign so high?
I mean, so there's also something that gets brought up a lot for rankings towards the end of like, and I think I kind of fell victim to this a little bit, but I felt it was justified at the time, was the recency bias of like the end of season rankings, right? For a team.
Yes.
But the difference is Fuel ended up like, let's say season 1, or like particularly season 1, they ended up doing okay from season 1 going into season 2, but I still didn't rank them very highly going into the next season. I was like, I still don't feel confident about this team. I'm not sure about it yet. But for Justice and Atlanta, moving into that, you saw that these are clear, especially for Atlanta, you saw these clear great additions to the squad overall. You saw that they were doing really, really well. Really, really well. Not just like well, but really, really well towards the end. And in addition, they were getting out of a GOATS-centric style, right? They were moving into a 2-2-2. So like teams like Justice could really take advantage of having players like Corey and not having to deal with just a meta that suddenly removes half of the character roster and entire roles like DPS. And I felt that was where Reign and Justice were really going to shine, was because of those, because of what they had currently available. And also I felt like Reign's structure, and it's been shown to be pretty true, pretty consistently when we look for current Shock, when we look at Fusion historically, when we look at the current rankings with Shanghai, is that teams that put in, there are exceptions, most notably Fuel, I think, but and Justice also, is that when you put in a lot of resources into your team, you generally get results, especially if it's resources that is directed towards competitive integrity versus, like, that's why I would say that this is where Toronto Defiant is also an exception from the rule, is that these are resources for Toronto I felt was built much more towards building a boy band similar to like Houston.
Yes.
In the same way that, but on the opposite side, we have teams like Shanghai or Fusion or Shock that have invested a lot. And also, I put Rain on the list. Rain is arguably, in my opinion, like the second Moneybags team in a way.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of crazy the amount of support their owner Paul shows to them, as someone that's talked to him and gone to Atlanta homestand and stuff. Like they the way they treated their academy team before that as well. Like it was just a lot of support, and I felt like they were doing everything right. Brad was clearly showing that he had pretty good scouting and was able to get the right players. And I think the support staff around Brad as well was able to sort of mold the team towards the end towards a great product. And we're still seeing Rain be very competitive even this year. Like they're still 8th currently in the standings. I think they're still doing fine. It's just they're not like top 5 like I thought, because they have some interesting, like we're not seeing Erster a lot, which I think is pretty odd because I expect to see a lot more Erster. They're clearly not having quite the same level of synergy that I expected, as I hear bottles rattling behind you, Jayne. It's like I don't know what's happening over there, but he's had to mute himself. But overall, I expected a lot more from Rain. I think the disappearance of Erster, which is I'm now renaming to like the Atlanta effect, is when a player just randomly disappears without notice. That is the Atlanta effect. It's like it becomes like an HBO like Krama
Because
dry.
it happened with their off tank as well. Right? I don't remember the individual's name now, but
Dako.
Yeah.
Now there were real reasons behind that, which obviously we can't.
I mean,
really
there's
share.
We hope there's reasons behind it.
I mean, I know the reasons behind
it,
it, but Dako hasn't retired though, right? Has he?
I have no idea, honestly.
Dako, chat, has Dako retired?
Chat is the infinite knowing.
Chat,
entity.
does anyone
They
know
all
if Dako's retired?
Okay, Theo. I don't know.
Dako hasn't retired? Okay, so yeah, we're not going to talk about why Dako was missing. But the point is that he hasn't retired, and it's still the Atlanta effect when a player randomly goes missing. And I don't know what's happened to Jayne. But the purpose is that I think I expected a lot more from them. And I don't feel that. I feel definitely wrong in certain aspects, but I also, since they're still top 8, and I think the league and the year the league has been its most competitive, I don't feel completely wrong necessarily on placing them highly. In fact, they still have plenty of time to ascend up the rankings towards the end. And I think they're only getting better as the season has gone on, even if with the Erster still missing. So I still feel confident in them climbing a bit for my rankings.
Looping back to one of the initial reasons that you were ranking them that much higher, you were talking about the resources that organizations, owners, people put into their team. Is that one of the reasons why you ranked the Washington Justice so high? Is because you were talking about Corey and their good performance in season 4, or stage 4 rather. But they're also
I was trying to big brain it, Jayne, just to cut to the meat of it. Like you said earlier, like people tried to big brain it. I was like, yeah, I like the Justice staff. I heard great things about the Justice staff coming in overall. Because, and you have a high opinion of John Galt, I believe, as well, don't you?
I mean, there's like every single member of the coaching staff from the Washington Justice that I've interacted with has been, very, very good, competent, friendly people. So yeah, I had great opinions of the staff as well, certainly.
Yeah, and the structure for the league had changed for the rules, so I felt like their carries at the time, because obviously I wasn't predicting Corey retiring, guys. Okay, I wasn't predicting Corey retiring. And Stratus retiring, I always thought Stratus was okay. I never felt like he was fantastic, so he never really factored into that much to the team's success for me. It was much more centered around Corey. And it's not that Stratus was bad, I said. It's just more the fact that I felt Stratus was never going to be like that player that really propelled them into the top tiers necessarily. It was always someone that would get the job done, but would never be like incredible.
Yeah.
But I felt like they'd finished we'd shown what would happen in a pretty mediocre roster, I would feel, with Yanis and Samuel Sam, as I referred to him, towards the end of the season, and with Corey being unshackled. And I felt like they had also upgraded their coaching staff overall. Not to say that Wizard was inherently bad, it's that he was a bad head coach.
Yeah, and
because it's different than being a bad staff versus being a bad head coach,
Yeah, he certainly. I don't think that there's anybody who can say that Wizard. I think that Wizard got a bad rap because of what happened with Washington. He was, as far as we know, the highest paid member, like the highest paid staff member in the Overwatch League at the time, and he had previous successes, both with New York Excelsior and beforehand. So I don't think that it was unreasonable to think that, anyway, where I'm trying to get here, we're just going to skip that entire thought process is that one of the biggest narratives about the Washington Justice throughout season 2 was the fact that they had initially planned to build their roster around Corey, and that Goats meta was one of the things that had kind of blocked them or become an obstacle to their success. So in the same way that we kind of trusted that the San Francisco Shock were building for season 2, is it kind of like, that was the catch-all excuse for losing in season 1, is that like, we were building for season 2. I think that there were also quite a few people who were thinking that like, okay, well, this worked for the San Francisco Shock. All of the same kind of signs are there. Could this be true? Could it be the fact that they were trying to build a roster around Corey? Could Corey be the next Carpe? Could they actually have this in the bag? All of these uncertainties gone. Season 3 really is their season. There's a lot of reasons why it could have been a good prediction, but
also, I was expecting travel in the mix, and they had 5 events where Justice literally didn't leave the U.S. Like,
yes.
Justice didn't exit the States, so their travel burden was almost like non-existent compared to a lot of other teams, especially if you compare them to like the Boston Uprising and such.
Yes.
Like, their travel burden was so easy comparatively, and also another organization that does give a lot of resources, and but it didn't necessarily mean that it's always like great. But I felt like. And once again, looking back at my rankings, I didn't predict them to be world beaters, right? I had like 7th. I was like top 8. Like, I think the logistics are going to serve them pretty well. I think their staff, and we've also started talking about this point too, Jayne, about how we feel staff should factor in a lot more heading forward. Like, even at these power rankings, I did put some emphasis on staff for the Justice, but I maybe probably undervalued it for other teams, most notably Paris and Valiant. But Paris, I felt like I wasn't sure that they were able to get a mixed roster right. But now I know because, they have done it right. So I don't have to doubt them anymore. And it's something that I think people overlook too. And I don't know what your opinion on it is that like, it does get brought up occasionally. Like, does a team moving from a fully one nationality, one language speaking roster, whether it be Korean or English, and then going mixed, mixed nationalities or languages, it can be a challenge and a hurdle to get over, and it has caused problems before. But I don't know if at this point we can just start saying that like, okay, staff are equipped to handle it by now in the Overwatch League,
And I also think that at this point, when we have this many veterans of the Overwatch League, when you are having these kind of rosters come into play, a lot more teams, especially Korean contenders teams, are starting to give their players English lessons. There's a lot more staff that are going to be able to be speaking Korean, as well as teams have more familiarity working cross-culturally. There is inherently just a level of institutional knowledge and familiarity that the Overwatch League as a whole gains over time. And I think at this point that strategies have come up with to actually handle these mixed rosters. And even if us like a member of the staff or like the head coach isn't familiar with it, the chances are that a player on your team has worked in a mixed roster before is going to make things a lot easier. They're being able to work through it. So I think that the problems associated with mixed rosters has certainly decreased as the age of the league has increased.
And also, before return, one final factor for Justice is that on top of all the other things, I overestimated Roar, I felt, because main tank is like the make or break factor for a lot of teams. I think it's sort of because even for Dallas, I don't think Gamsu is currently for Dallas doing anything super extraordinary necessarily.
No. And I don't
but
think
he has shored up a lot of the problems and has made it much more
Yes.
solidified, right?
Yeah, I don't think that Gamsu is the kind of main tank that you were, if you're going to compare him to like Fissure, because he was the Los Angeles Gladiators former tank. Gamsu, one of the big things that people were excited about with Gamsu joining the Dallas Fuel is that he'd be joining Note, somebody who he'd had previous success with on the Boston Uprising. And Gamsu had always been, a very positive presence, a leadership figure, and that is what the Dallas Fuel needed. They needed kind of that leadership. They didn't need an exceptionally skilled main tank. They had that. They had that with OG. OG is a fantastically mechanically skilled main tank player. And now he's on the Los Angeles Gladiators. So I think that the Dallas Fuel got exactly what they needed and wanted from Gamsu, but in the case of Roar, that's not what they were going for, and they were going for that kind of mechanical god type of main tank, and I don't think they found it.
Yeah, you have to think of roster building like an RPG, like class builder, where you only have so many points for so many things to put into to all your various parts of your roster, and like certain players have certain elements that other players don't, and you have to like stack them in such a way to where it works out. And like you can develop areas, like you can make a young player, you can always build them to have better game sense if they have incredible mechanics. It's a lot harder to get mechanics, there are definitely things you can stack in your favor, but it's a lesson to be learned. It's a lesson to be learned in terms of like once again how main tanks make or break teams, I think, and what their intangibles bring to that roster.
Mhm.
So was wrong on the justice. I think they could it could have been maybe different with some more travel. Like they could have jumped up a few spots in their current standings potentially, even with some loss, even with the loss of some players. But that's just life, right? I couldn't have
Yep.
predicted the thing for Titans either. But the one thing I do feel very vindicated on, for the most part, is Dragons. I do feel
Yes.
vindicated on Dragons, and we have to reflect here, Jayne. And is that is it now time to start saying? Is it now time to start saying that Fearless is in contention for like this turnaround from his season one performance being on like the worst team ever to being in the current Dragons? Is Fearless just? Oh, and also was Coach Moon, who was also one of the coach for the Dragons. Are these particular this player and this coach being overlooked? I think maybe they might both be a little bit overlooked, or they're being overblown. Which one? How would you think about them? You know, as we look at their current standings.
I would just be completely guessing. We're going back to these kind of intangible things where, especially in Overwatch, you can have on a great team, everybody looks great. On a bad team, everybody looks bad, sort of thing. I don't have enough information to even kind of take a guess about whether
Yeah.
they're overvalued, undervalued, whether like what happened with the initial season, especially, like you add in the um how unfamiliar I am with, for example, how Chinese teams or organizations really operated. I think that
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more familiar with kind of Korean culture,
Hmm.
internal teams, and American culture, how they run teams. But there is a lot of uh, just things that I don't know about how Chinese teams and organizations operate. So it's very great to see from an external factor, but trying to figure out kind of like the internal reasons, or like what if Moon and Fearless were such capable individuals, certain thing, that just begs the question about like why weren't they able to show those results or show those capabilities on the previous iteration? There is always the possibility. People aren't static; people change. So it could be the fact that they learned from their experience, they gained some motivation. Maybe they experienced failure, took a hit, had to eat a slice of humble pie, and were re-energized, remotivated, came back fresh, and with a new approach. Like there's 1,000 different things that could be here, and I am in no way certain enough to say it's one thing or another. So that is my super long-winded cop-out answer that I simply don't know.
Understandable. And as a final point before we move from my rankings to Yiska's power rankings, which I want to look at next, is that I perfectly predicted London's current placement. Just want to say it. We're all mid-season, so it doesn't really count. It's
You're
where
a
they end up at the end of the
genius.
season. But
Genius.
looking back at the Plat Chat rankings and even the Yesco rankings too, that we're going to look at right now, people underestimated London. I think people underestimated London pretty heavily, and I think, and I want to talk about it as our first point as we look at Yiska's power rankings, Jayne, and what your thoughts on that are. Is like I feel, and I've made this statement before, not that long ago. It's not an old statement, but I think London are currently and Valiant in addition to that, but Valiant's an easy one because everyone's like, oh wow, they're kind of popular and they're doing pretty well. But I think those are the models for how a team in the Overwatch League moving forward are probably going to be built. Is London and Valiant?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, people always kind of get annoyed when I keep bringing it up, but I think that there is a very specific business case, not only to the results that these teams are getting, but also the result per money spent results they're getting.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that, if anything, is going to influence, especially since we're in the COVID world now, where budgets are getting a little bit tighter. The economy, woo, we'll just gloss over that. But yeah, budgets aren't infinite, sort of thing. So if you are seeing these teams, especially more well-respected teams like Cloud9, London Spitfire, they had a championship roster, and they're like, you know what, let's try, and instead of spending a gajillion dollars on these guys, let's do it again. Let's build it up from scratch with this roster that doesn't really have any expectations. And I think that a lot of people undersold the London Spitfire place in the rankings because there was no reason to rank them anywhere else. These players were unproven. They were unknown for the majority of them. Like Glister, of course, is insane. But overall, the vast majority of people just had no idea whether or not that this team would be successful or not. You think back to when Runaway was coming over to actually play in the Overwatch League. There were a lot of people who undersold Runaway as well as just a contenders roster. Like, how really would they be able to handle themselves in the Overwatch League, sort of thing? You know, historically, anybody who doubted Runaway now looks like an idiot. But back then, it was still uncertain, right? People don't know. It's really hard to tell relative power strength. So when you're seeing a team kind of going for these budget approaches, you think that they're going to have budget results. But now that Valiant and the London Spitfire are showing that, like, no, if you're doing this the right way, if you have a good organization, if you're focused on improvement, over time you can show results, and a decent result and consistent results for a fraction of what the people trying to build boy bands are doing. So
Yeah, and not just boy bands, even also just like hyper competitive. Like I think a great example of a team that has spent a lot and is struggling to get results, though for various reasons, is like Gladiators. You
mhm.
know, and also I dare to say Fuel goes into that into that fucking motto too.
I honestly was thinking that's who you were gonna
Yeah,
say. So,
I mean, I think Fuel definitely goes into there a little bit as well. I think it's
yeah,
better. It's the best season yet in many ways for Fuel, which is great.
yeah.
But it's still like following into that trend of like a lot of money spent without necessarily a lot of tangible
Yeah,
reward.
and I think that one of the things to also just one of those other things, the conflating factors going into these preseason power rankings, is that people did think that the Dallas Fuel was going to be better than these rankings apply, because at this point we were still considering the Pacific region to be the absolute region of death, right? So,
Yeah.
there were a lot of people who are saying that, like, oh, the Dallas Fuel could be somewhere between 8 and 12 or something like that, but they're in the region of death. Atlantic's got it
Mhm.
easy, sort of things. People didn't realize that Florida Mayhem were actually going to be pretty decent, and a lot of the teams that were underrated all happened to conveniently be in the Atlantic division. So, especially with Arrow coming off of the World Cup victory and things like that, like Dallas Fuel was definitely ranked higher than this kind of qualitatively, but looking at like where are they actually going to be placing based off of not just relative strengths, but also their opponents. The Pacific ranking was really considered the division of death, and now we know that that is not nearly as true as it might once have seemed.
No, yeah, it's gotten better. And overall, though, I think people have stated like, yes, London hasn't played as many games. People in chat have even said London hasn't played as many games. True, they haven't, but also neither is Fuel. But yet people are just as quickly to write off Fuel as being terrible
Yeah,
as London being like
I
not
mean
as
that's
terrible.
that's because it's popular to hate Fuel.
Yeah, and also in addition to that, I think sure London hasn't played as many games, but London just came off a result of they moved regions. They won a pretty decisive game versus Chengdu, and they had some okayish showings, not great versus Charge and such. But then they just went to map 5 versus Shanghai, and this is the most recent. Like now they've got some consistent practice under their feet, and I think people are underestimating the fact that we should be the London shouldn't be we shouldn't be viewing London as like, oh, they played too few games. This isn't like a great example. I feel like that would be a much more arguable result if they had played against bad teams and done really close or lost. But considering they're losing against good teams and then playing the map 5 versus Shanghai with very few amounts of matches played, that only leaves them plenty of room to go up
Hmm.
statistically in my view. And even if they finish at best like 10th place or 9th place in the season, I think that as a success for London as an organization, much the same way that if you finish 8th to 10th as Valiant, that is a success for Valiant as an organization. And it also, London is another example of a team that is thriving under staff versus players, because London is filled with some pretty famous staff currently. I believe their staff, let's see, I have a list of their staff. So their current staff are Agape, Pavane, Sit
Yes.
S&T, who used to be, awesome guy who was a coach player for the Florida Mayhem at one point. And then Twinkle, and I don't know as much about Twinkle. I know that I think he was with he's with BK Stars. And then but Agape and also Pavane are obviously very notable coaches. And I think the style for London, or I think there's like a different way to say Agape, both those names. It's like Pavane or like Aga. I
I'm
think
not
there's a
even giving it
particular
a
way to
shot.
stay. It's sort of like Onamo. It's supposed to be like Anamo, but I don't know the correct pronunciation, so I'm sorry. I don't know the correct pronunciation that well. So
I had
such as
actually
I'm sorry.
completely forgot that Pavane was London
Yeah,
Spitfire.
He was with New York. Yeah, and
Yeah,
he
yeah.
was the head coach for New York at
Pavane.
one point.
I mean, yeah, like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Legendary coach at this point. A pretty notable coach in the Overwatch League. I think the same for is it Agape? Agape? Okay, Agape. I think at this point also is fitted into that for me for the London Spitfire. And this is another roster that has hedged its success on staff versus getting very high, very big billboard players.
Hmm.
And it's cut costs significantly. And I think finishing between 8 to 12 is considered a pretty big success, considering all the money that's probably saved for those rosters, in my view. And I think they're only going to go up more
I
than
think,
likely.
yeah. Okay, so last one that we're going to be taking a look at. So we talked about Plat Chats, we talked about yours. The last one on our list is going to be Yiska's preseason power rankings. So now, before we jump into these, do you want to kind of give everybody a little bit of a background? Not everyone's familiar with Yiska as an individual, so why did we pick him as our third preseason power rankings to cover over anybody else, any other content creators or individuals, etc.?
Well, first, we couldn't find any others. So
That's
there's
not true.
No, we could. It was kind of hard to find a list of like ones we wanted, right? But secondly, but more importantly, is that Yiska is a relatively notable figure within the league. If you're big into the competitive side, he's been around a bit, been around a while. Does have has spent quite a bit of time writing about Overwatch, getting together with other analysts about Overwatch. So it is just an interesting ranking to look at. He has a decent amount of insider information. So he's not like an unqualified figure, Like I think he's notable when when someone I would say people have different opinions of what makes an analyst, but I think at this point it would be relatively fair to say that he is at the very least at the very beginning of like an analyst, like he leaned a lot more towards journalism
Mhm.
and still does.
Yes.
But he does have some notability there.
Yeah,
And I
he's
think
another
that's really it.
individual who is like there's a lot of people like Michael, like Halo, who get quite a lot of notoriety for being, I suppose, leakers. Yiska is another individual who doesn't leak nearly as often, but knows quite a bit about what goes on kind of behind the scenes. So when we're talking about how staff members and teams and like trades and things, this is all information that Yiska is going to be, I suppose, more informed about than the average person, sometimes even more than people in the Overwatch League. So he's somebody who I would consider always kind of like take this with, if something is really weird there, it's probably because he knows something that other people don't, and maybe he just can't talk about it. So.
Though people do get mad at him, as they say, blue balling over juice all the time. That's what everyone always says. Like, Yiska never gives us the juice. But overall,
I mean, Yiska has also like teased Reddit quite a few times with like knowing things and then not saying what they are.
The juice.
Yeah.
But we can move on from his that background and more of the actual rankings themselves. And we've hit a lot of these points. Paris, most notably, I feel like we see Paris pretty low on this. The one thing that is actually, there are two teams that I think are the most important here, looking from the rankings, the current standings, and one is obviously the Mayhem, and the second is the Boston Uprising.
Oh, there's a third.
Oh wait, there is a third. What would be your third?
Houston Outlaws.
Outlaws. Outlaws are a great one too.
Yep.
Do you want to start with Outlaws? Let's start with Outlaws. Huh? Let's start with our thoughts on the Outlaws.
So this is one of those things that I've been trying to find like a reasoning why the Outlaws were being ranked so much higher, and I think that's kind of the big question here. Is like the Houston Outlaws are a team that's definitely struggled, and I don't think that any of their changes during the offseason would have made them any kind of cases for these types of improvements. So I think that Houston Outlaws probably is just the one that I don't have any reasons, because I obviously didn't make this preseason rank, but I think that it's one of the stranger ones that, when you look at your rankings for the Houston Outlaws, they were much lower at 16th. Plat Chat put them to 18th. And I think the average for the placement of the Houston Outlaws on most people's power ranking was near 16 or 17. So to see Yiska put them at 11, that was just kind of like a big kind of like question mark.
Yeah.
Like, why is this? Why were we expecting the Houston Outlaws to perform so much better than they had in the past, and most other people predicted them to?
I think, it's also weird to me because it's not unreasonable now to, when you look at current Outlaws, to be like, okay, I see some qualities that can put them in the top 12 at this point, but I think before there was just no evidence to state that they were like, like the number one biggest factor for me in the Outlaws, and in a lot of ways, is they've definitely evolved a bit as a team moving forward, but legitimately I don't think I think people are still stuck on Muma a lot of times, and people people are stuck on Muma a lot. And it's not, I've never thought Muma was necessarily bad, but he's always been like a very particular type of player. And it's clear how much Houston as an overall roster has leveled up with the addition of Hydration as a main tank. And it doesn't, once again, a
Weird
player
sentence.
a player being substituted doesn't always make a player bad, right? A team getting much better by substituting in another player doesn't make a player really bad, right? Like when Fate was left from the Valiant, that doesn't mean Fate was a bad player, right? Like Fate's doing spectacular for the Mayhem currently, and they substituted in Fact Fiction at the time, who's obviously not in the league anymore and is retired, but played really well when he got substituted in at the time and was playing for the Valiant. So I don't think that we can walk away from this and say that Buma is bad. That isn't what we're pushing for. It's not what I'm pushing for. I'm simply saying that hydration levels up the roster in its current form and in the way that they're currently trying to play Overwatch, and in a much more tangible way than Muma does, because Muma is a very particular type of player in how he plays the game and has been noted by everyone for a very long time. But people don't like to say that a lot of people disagree with that fact because people just like Muma. And I understand that. I get that. But he plays Overwatch in a very specific manner. And I think hydration makes his roster way better now to where we can actually say, like, okay, yes, they're in contention for top 12. Before, I wouldn't really say so.
And it is kind of weird how many kind of like awkward shifts, like the fact that you're saying the Houston Outlaws seeing a big upgrade with hydration on main tech, like that's still a weird sentence or a
To
sentence
say, to utter from your mouth in general.
Yeah. And then there's other things where like Dante was looking, I suppose, like really quite good on Sombra. A lot of people are really high on Dante's Sombra during season 2, and I think that he's really shown himself as an Echo player. So he is certainly more flexible. People were considering him more along the lines of like a Sombra tracer specialist, where he's showing to be more flexible than people thought. And then we also had kind of that issue with, I suppose, Blase's McCree, where there are some just really weird roster things with the Houston Outlaws that, if anything else, is just making them kind of inconsistent, and a lot more unpredictable.
Yeah. And so overall, but it wasn't like the most egregious. We also obviously underestimated like Yiska, heavily underestimated Paris, even more so than I felt I did. Yeah, even more so than me. Looking back at it, he put Paris at 18th, which, we talked a bit about conventional wisdom. Like we weren't sure about the players. They still had like Binbest and Nico, and everyone was like Binbest and Nico. Wow. Like, and now Binbest and both Nico are actually doing spectacularly well. It just goes to show you the power of staff. And I think that's really the takeaway and the narrative we should continue to move when we do rankings in the future. I know I'm going to do it. Like, even if you're not going to do preseason rankings, I'm going to do it again because they're funny content. You're kind of just seeing where it ends. And
endless discussion, because you can't be wrong.
Yeah. Can't be wrong.
For a couple months.
Yeah, you have some time. You have a leading indicator, right? It's like shorting the housing market in 2008.
You have just enough time for the power rankings to be quietly forgotten. So, yeah.
Its staff is just very, very important. And, we didn't expect that Paris would be able to mold to a mixed roster so well.
Yeah.
And for their existing fringe players to actually be so good now in this new format. So there's really else. I can't even criticize Yiska on that much because I thought much the same, I thought much the same. I can't blast him on that. I can sort of blast him on Houston. But I can't really blast him anymore on that. And also he put Mayhem even higher than I did. And Mayhem's doing fantastic. So Yiska, well done on that one. Like I felt I wasn't super confident on Mayhem moving forward because I've once again expressed the opinion that I'm not huge on player coaches. And it's still kind of a 50-50. Like, I think player coaches aren't serving Defiant very well. And they haven't served other teams well in the past, but they're currently serving Mayhem really well. Kuki seems to be leading the team in a really good direction. So I guess the answer should be less of maybe I always doubt player coaches and maybe just try to do it on a much more individual basis. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to do without knowing them personally. It's hard to do.
It's very hard to know. One of the biggest challenges I think for myself as I was trying to make it into the Overwatch League as a coach or as a member of the staff is that, when I'm trying to, if I approach anything else, I want to see how the people in the field are currently doing it, and if you're trying to become a professional player, for example, well, what do? You watch pro VODs, you watch games, you watch first-person perspective, third-person perspective, you look at how the pros are doing, and your starting point is to emulate that. But, the only way you really know how these coaches work from the outside, you can know if you actually know the individual or you hear things that are going on, but actually trying to figure out how these staff members actually operate. You can certainly start drawing some data points together and see that, this individual has good, consistent results, sort of all, but you never really know the source of those results or how they're obtaining them. So I think that's probably a good time to lead into our mailbag before we get into our current power rankings, which I think is how we're going to end the show. But our mailbag for this week, we wanted to ask you guys to rank the teams based not on their players, but only on their staff or on their organizational structure.
Didn't we also ask on what their ideal format would be? Wasn't that the other question?
That was last week, but that's
was that last week?
The question for this week is that yeah. So we'll go over your answers from Tuesday, but for this weekend, let us know your power rankings for teams based off of just their coaching, their staff, or their organizational structure. Your choice.
A lot of good answers there, honestly. A lot of good answers that could be found in their chat. But if you say something dumb, then I won't like that one as much, especially if I see another. I think a lot of people typed mid regular season in our other mailbag when I said stop typing regular season in another mailbag. So don't bring that back for that one either. Don't bring that back. Do we want to move directly into mailbag now, or do we want to do our last bit of power ranking stuff?
What was our mailbag from Tuesday?
It was what would be your ideal format for the Overwatch League? Like, what would be your changes and how like a viewer would like for Overwatch League? Okay. Well, looking at our mailbag from last week, I'll do the second one first,
all right,
which is from
yeah, good. How do you pronounce that?
Yisader Day.
Just put a really crazy accent on it. You can't be wrong.
Well, I don't want to offend anyone necessarily. Like, I don't know. Like Yisader, we're gonna go with a Yisader Day. Which has this to say about the tournament changes, which is the issue with monthly tournament for me is that teams' distribution is just a mess, and the structure with conferences and divisions, which is Pacific West and East / Atlantic South and North, playing against each other with a midseason tournament is reasonable, but with some patchwork is reasonable. Okay, but with some patchwork, you do a series based on travels with 4 stages with qualifiers, then playoffs. Wait a minute. This sounds. I've heard this one before. 4 stages and then playoffs? Wait a minute. Who is okay? I'll keep reading. So they'll have intra-conference tournament 1 in one division, intra-conference tournament 1. So they would have a bunch of tournaments between 2 divisions. Then they would have a mid-season tournament, and then 2 more intra-conference tournaments between those 2 divisions, and then they would lead into playoffs. But travel is not to be underestimated, and while doing games between all those teams would be a pain, some it wouldn't be as hard, such and such. So their solution would be 4 stages with 4 tournaments, and then a mid-season tournament after the regular season games. So that still requires regular season games, though.
Yeah.
Which is telling me that they want regular season games.
And you really don't like those. You really don't like those.
That's what it's telling. I mean, you have to have some form of like a regular season, you have to have some form, but why does it have to be just regular games? It doesn't have to be. But what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
I was just thinking that the interconference tournaments really reminds me of the gauntlets that they did last year for contenders. Like I really liked those. The like the Melee tournament was fun, but it was like Asian region and North American region. And eventually once the Overwatch League expands to Europe, we'll have multiple regions. And I think that if we go above 2 different regional tournaments, that might be a little bit much, and I am a big fan of the idea of interconference tournaments where it would be really nice to see a giant bracket with all of the teams so that we can actually see, the Shanghai Dragons versus the San Francisco Shock. That is going to be a matchup we're going to have to wait probably a pretty long time to see, but I know that I'm personally dying to see it. So more interconference tournaments, more interregional competition, the better.
I like that they're bringing up like playing more internationally, right? But I don't think anyone is suggesting not to do more international play. Like that's in fact the whole purpose.
It's more than we're doing right now.
Yeah. But I'm saying that's like the whole purpose of like I feel a tournament style system, which is what we're moving to of like you're playing more people from the other teams from elsewhere, right? Like as opposed to regular season where you're just kind of landlocked within your own stuff. So, I don't know. But overall, not unreasonable. I think it balances the issues of travel with some of the like the logistic issues with giving some excitement and solving some of the other ones. But it is I prefer still more tournaments, but that's just me. Okay, that's just me. I'm gonna have to get over it at some point. Do you want to go for the second one from Aaron P. Walls?
Aaron P. Walls says, I think the best system is an expanded version of the tournament system. I like where this is going already, bud. You could do 6-week rotations. Week 1 to 4 are qualifiers, week 5 is the tournament, and week 6 is a break. If the league wants to continue the homestands next season, then each team could host a tournament throughout the season, and the host gets an automatic berth into the tournament. Automatic berth into the tournament just for hosting a homestand? Not sure I'm cool with that one, but going on, he says no team would want to host, but then not be able to play in front of their. Oh, he's just trying to justify it. At the end of the season is the playoffs, and the winning of each tournament gets an automatic berth, while the rest of the spots are filled by the remaining teams with the best overall records. I'd like to see a play-in if you're going to put this format into play, but you always want if you have a team that really improves like right at the end of the you want them to be able to kind of do that Royal Road run. So I'd always like to see if you're going to have like grand final tournaments, you definitely want to have a play-in system. But other than that, seems like a fun system. I like the break. I like the rotation. Keeps things fresh. Maybe attach new metas or balance patches to the actual tournament cycle itself. A man can dream. And you have a pretty good system right there.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think the system that I prefer, the way to balance it is like there's a point style system, sort of like the Valve does with the CSGO and Dota, where it's majors and minors, but obviously it would just be homestands and tournaments. And you're just going to play the tournaments at the homestands, and however many points you earn, then qualify you for playoffs. But the tournaments get increasingly weighted as the season goes on. So if you start popping off, which is how League used to do it, League of Legends, and Monty brought this up to me when we were doing his show together, is that when you is that way it allows for teams, instead of having to play in at the end, it then actually still more holistically allows for teams to do better at the end of the season to make it in. Still, if they're doing okay in the beginning but do much better towards the end, they make it in, right? Because sometimes if you do a play-ins but that team was like utter garbage in the beginning, I really don't think the team that is the best at the end deserves to be in playoffs. It's the team that is the best on average throughout the season, So if you're 50% terrible, 50% good, I don't think you're really, obviously depending on the score lines of everyone else, I don't think you necessarily should be in playoffs. But if you're like 30% terrible and like 40% terrible, 60% good, then that should average it out to be about like, okay, like, yeah, sure, you can make it in or something like that. Like, there definitely should be some, I think having that weight system is better. Also, with teams worried about playing in front of their fans at homestands, just make it double a limb. Just have a loser's bracket and a winner's bracket, there's so many options to allow for teams to play. But that's enough of my ranting. I don't want to rant anymore about homestands, or else all the people are going to hit me with regular season POG, and we're going to like devolve into a spiral really quickly.
Yeah, and we're running out of time here because Off the Break is going to be happening right after this show for you, the Call of Duty fans. And for next week, we're not going to be having a Tuesday show. Only one show next week because the Overwatch League is on break, so we have less to cover. So we'll be back for only one show next week, Thursday at 5 p.m. Is there anything else for us to cover before we close out the show today?
We have like 3 minutes really until about our cutoff because Lando has Off the Break after this. If you're a Call of Duty fan, whoever was asking about EnvyCod earlier, Lando is coming up next after this for Off the Break. But as my closing statement, it should be preseason power rankings are fun. We should take them as a way to learn. Because I think, just reflecting on my own and all the other analysts, like, everyone should take this away to take a lesson from stuff. Like, they're not gospel necessarily, but there's always things that you get right, always things you get wrong, and we should take it as a chance to just like learn and let's meme about it. We do Marvel power rankings, we do all sorts of power rankings. Why not preseason? Why not preseason rankings as well?
I think the best things that they really do, they're not about predicting the future. I think that they're about kind of looking back and appreciating the past, seeing both what surprised us and what was known versus unknown. So it is a lot more fun, I must admit, looking back at these in the future. So, making them the amount of like drama and controversy and discussion that goes around them, it's kind of like, I'm the kind of guy who's like, I don't know. There's not enough information for any of you guys to know these things, but I might just start doing them just to see exactly how wrong I will be.
Because then if you're right, you can be like, yeah, I'm kind of a genius.
Yeah, and then I'll do it.
And then if you're
once,
wrong, you have a cop out. You can just be like, well, who would know?
Who would know? Nobody. It's impossible to know. Yeah, butterfly effect. But that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Whether you were watching on Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube, watching it live, I hope you enjoyed it. We do, of course, see your chat during the show, so feel free to talk, and we respond. We see everything you guys are saying, even when you're making fun of us, which you never do because you're a nice chat. But if
we never made our ranking, by the way, Jayne. Made our own. Weren't we supposed to make our own power ranking for midseason?
Yeah, you made. Are you?
I don't think we made. Did we make one? Did you make one?
Yeah,
Did you already make one?
Yes. But we ran out of time, so I thought we would skip it.
Well, we'll put. Maybe we'll get that one out there later. Maybe we'll get that one out there. Okay, let's and a good way to end it out. Thank you guys for watching. I think BI 9foot says Avast, you're ugly. Thank you. Appreciate that. And that has been contested, and we will see you on Thursday. Love you guys.
See you
Bye-bye.
Thursday. Bye.